I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we talk about the most recent updates from Mariupol and speak to women and LGBTQI+ activist Olena Shevchenko about her experiences of the war and what her charitable organisation is doing to help.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, I sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's April 13th, day 49. And today I'm joined by Assistant Foreign Editor Katie O'Neill and Assistant Comment Editor Francis Dearnley. Dominic Nichols is away. I started by asking Katie for the latest news from Mariupol.
Yeah, fighting continues to be very fierce in Mariupol. It's an area that's been really beleaguered during the war, and Ukrainian forces have, so far put on a really valiant display of defence. But we're hearing reports from Ukrainians on the ground saying that they're running out of ammunition, they're outmanned and they're outnumbered, and that's really coming home to roost now. There are reports from the Russian Defence Ministry today saying that about 1,000 Ukrainian Marines in Mariupol have downed weapons and have surrendered. The Ukrainians are yet to confirm that report, but it's also being cited by Kadyrov, the Chechen leader who claims to be in Mariupol. Among that brigade that has supposedly the downed arms in Mariupol is a British man called Johnny Aslan. He is a volunteer Marine, so he's part of that 36th Marine Brigade that has supposedly surrendered to Russian forces in Mariupol. We had carried a report in today's paper which said that Johnny Aslan has written a social media post in which he said that the Marines that he was fighting amongst had no chance and had no option but to surrender. The Mariupol mayor today has said that around 100,000 people need to be evacuated from the city. However, the Ukrainians were not able to launch any humanitarian corridors today because shelling is so fierce in the east. We see Russian columns converging on the Donbass and in the east. So, it's pretty grim reports from Mariupol this morning.
Thanks, Katie. Francis, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just add that we've spoken, I think, very briefly, but I think it's worth just taking this moment to consider it a little bit more deeply, the appointment of a new army general in the Donbass region, Alexander Devonikov. He is now the sort of effectively the new commander in Ukraine as the Russians have sought to centralise command and control into the Donbass region. Now, what's significant about him, concerningly, is his previous command experience in Syria, where, of course, chemical warfare and incredibly vicious tactics were normalised. And I think it speaks to the brutality that we can expect in the coming days and weeks as the front is extended there. The Defence Secretary and Defence Ministry have put out this morning here in Britain some analysis about him and what they expect to be happening in the coming days. And as I say, the messaging is about these progressing offensives in the Donbass and a refocusing of military efforts there, demonstrating, and this is a quote, demonstrates how determined Ukrainian resistance and ineffective pre-war planning have forced Russia to reassess its operations. But as I say, it's a concerning development and one that I think speaks to this increasing violence that we can expect in the coming days and weeks as Putin's forces and, of course, Putin himself have become increasingly desperate.
Thanks, Francis. Can we talk a little bit about Viktor Medvedchuk, a prisoner captured by the Ukrainians yesterday? It was seen as a bit of a coup for them. So who was he? Why does he matter?
Maverchuk is a Ukrainian who is a very close ally to Putin. So close is he to Putin that Maverchuk has made Putin the godfather of his daughter. He is a pro-Russian separatist in the east of Ukraine. He'd previously been under house arrest. The Ukrainians had put him under house arrest owing to suspicions that he was leaking information to the Russians and owing to some of his actions during the annexation of Crimea. But during the start of the invasion, at the very start, it emerged that he had escaped house arrest. He was at large, and this has been a bone of contention for the Ukrainians. It has now emerged that they have captured him or recaptured him. And we've seen images put out today and last night from the Ukrainians of Medvedchuk looking very downcast, naturally, in handcuffs. Zelensky today has confirmed that he has been recaptured, and he has in fact offered him up as a potential in a maybe forthcoming prisoner swap. So yeah, it's something that Ukrainians will be applauding today, that development.
I think it's also significant that this is somebody who effectively controlled probably around 10% of the Ukrainian parliament at the height of his powers. And it just speaks to the shift that we've seen in Ukraine in the more Western direction since the invasion. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that had the Russian offensive gone the way that was intended, that Kiev had been invaded and successfully in those opening days, and Zelensky perhaps had been captured or forced to flee the country, then it could well have been that he was actually the sort of puppet leader of Ukraine. And so I think, as I say, it just speaks to the shifts that we have seen, that now this very, very influential Ukrainian politician and effectively, as I say, a very, very close ally of Putin is now beyond the pale and has been photographed in this way. Before we move on to some of the diplomatic developments that we've seen today, because there have been quite a few, can we talk a little bit about Bucha? There's been more people, the death toll has climbed as Ukrainian and foreign investigators are finding more bodies. Can we talk a little bit about that? What's the latest there? Yes, well, Bucha, of course, has been in the minds of all of us ever since the discoveries of so many atrocities in previous days. And there has been some more analysis of that in terms of the death toll. So it's believed now that more than 720 people were killed in Bucha and other Kiev suburbs that were occupied by Russian troops, and more than 200 others are considered missing. That comes from the Ukraine's Interior Ministry this morning. And as I say, it's further evidence of the scale of the crimes that appear to have been committed by Russian forces there. I spoke yesterday about an investigative piece by the New York Times where they were tracing the life stories and final moments of some of the bodies that were discovered in Bucha. And it obviously completely shows the lies of Putin's propaganda machine, claiming that these were actually killed by Ukrainians because, people who survived in Bucha were able to testify to what really occurred when these innocent people were killed by Russian forces. And as I say, I think this is only the beginning of a broader trend that we will see. I mean, Mariupol, if it falls completely, it may be some time before we're able to understand the true scale of what has occurred there. But from what we are hearing, and as many as 10,000 killed, I think we can expect even worse scenes when hopefully Mariupol at some point is eventually liberated.
I'll just come in there and add that another quite sinister development from Bucha yesterday was a report from the Ukrainians, their human rights body there, saying that as a result of being raped by Russian soldiers, 9 women are now pregnant in Bucha. And this is, as the war is going on and Russians are retreating from different areas, and the international community is able to go in and see the extent of the damage that they've left behind. A common theme that is emerging is the sexual assault of women, something that, is a sad reality of war, but perhaps one that we didn't expect to see darkening our door in Europe. Thanks both. Moving on to the diplomacy. So Joe Biden has said for the first time on Tuesday that there is growing evidence that Russia's invasion of Ukraine amounts to genocide. He couched that by saying that it'll be up to lawyers to make the final determination. Emmanuel Macron has reacted by saying we should be careful with our language. What's happened exactly, and does this amount to a diplomatic spat, or is it just a disagreement?
Well, I think the definition of genocide is one that obviously is very complicated, not only due to the legal parameters, but also how it's understood, I think, in the context of European history. Typically, a genocide is described about the attempted murder of an entire ethnic group. But it has, as I say, some other understandings that are slightly broader in terms of mass murder. And so we have to be a little bit careful about that language. And I think that that's what Macron was speaking to when he said to be careful around the language. But it is certainly significant. And what we don't know is whether President Biden meant this as a deliberate political strategy, to underline the brutality of Putin, or whether it was a sort of misspeak as part of a broader speech that he was giving. We don't know, but it is, I think, again underlining the fact that it's going to be very, very challenging for the international community to have any dealings whatsoever with Putin when you're calling him somebody who has participated in genocide, or at the very least mass murder and war crimes. It's effectively, I think, shutting the door on certain diplomatic efforts. We're not going to see, I don't believe, President Biden or an American president shaking hands with Vladimir Putin ever again. That, I think, for many of us would be seen as a positive thing, that, you make this man an international pariah. And yet, remember, this will have consequences, not only for peace talks, but also for the long-term relationship with Russia. And, it's something that may well cause complications further down the road. If I could just speak to one other very interesting diplomatic development, which is more or less breaking within the last half an hour. We hear that Sweden is on the verge of applying for NATO membership. We alluded to this yesterday as being a possibility. And so are Finland as well. But Sweden, we actually know that seems to be moving very much considerably quicker. So that would be two other states that are effectively on Russia's border, applying to join the Joint Military Pact. Again, it underlines the mistakes that Putin has made. He was hoping that this would send a clear message to the states of Eastern Europe that, they were within essentially Russian sphere of influence, and that has clearly now backfired in terms of how those nations are now steered more towards the West. But I just wanted to comment on one other aspect of this, which is the ages of the leaders in these countries. So we've talked before about Angela Merkel and the perhaps naivety and mistakes that she has made in terms of her relationship with Russia and Vladimir Putin. The Swedish Prime Minister is 55 years old, Merkel was 67, and the Finnish Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, is 36. As I say, I think it's a comment on the generational shift that we are seeing, that perhaps some of that perhaps historical baggage or attitudes towards Russia are now beginning to shift, and the current leadership of these powers is now moving more westward. And essentially, I think it just, as I say, it underlines the disavowing of the policies of the previous generation towards Russia in Eastern Europe. And so, as I say, this is a very significant shift as some of these Eastern European nations lean even more closely towards the West and NATO.
Thank you very much, Francis. Casey, is there anything you'd like to add before we welcome Olena Shevchenko to the chat?
As Francis was alluding to there, when Putin launched the invasion in Ukraine, one of the justifications for his war was to combat the expansion of NATO. So the reports coming out of Sweden that Sweden is planning to join NATO this summer, and the words from the Finnish Prime Minister that they will make that decision within weeks, not months, is something that's likely to be quite effective in getting under Putin's skin. He said that sanctions don't mean much to him, and that's been kind of the thrust of the Western response to date. So this expansion of NATO is something that is likely to perturb him. Just to quickly go back to the Biden words today, Joe Biden has to date really resisted calling this a genocide. At his press conferences in the White House, his media advisors constantly not being drawn on that, although Biden has accused Putin of war crimes. He is yet to, until today, call this a genocide, which he did during a speech in Iowa last night. But just to touch on the sort of the contrast between himself and Macron, once again, Macron was cautioning today that we have to be careful about our language, but this isn't the first time that he's made such comments after Biden has spoken out about the war in Ukraine. During a speech in Warsaw recently, the US president said that Mr. Putin can't remain in power, which was sort of seized upon and taken to mean that he was calling for a regime change in Russia. It forced the US press office in the White House to come out and clarify that Mr. Biden wasn't calling for a regime change. And after that, Mr. Macron said that it was important that we don't escalate tensions in terms of the rhetoric around the war. So there is sort of a contrast in between the responses of those two Western leaders.
Olena Shevchenko is a leading campaigner for female and LGBTQI+ rights in Ukraine. In 2008, she founded the NGO Insight, and more recently, Marsh Zinok, a women's rights initiative that has been giving practical assistance for women, their children and families since Russia invaded in February. Olena spoke to us from Lviv, and for this conversation, Francis, Katie and I were also joined by activist Valerie Voshchevska.
I'm actually staying in Lviv, where we have shelters which we established as a response to the war in Ukraine. So basically what we did 2 shelters for LGBTQI person and also women, which is based now in Western region. So I'm traveling like all around the Ukraine, trying to help and support of those who are the most marginalized ones and left behind, let's be honest, during this war. Without any support, without access to food, medicines, hormones, relocation, everything. So what we've been trying to do now is to support of the casual people who are in a very bad situation.
And for those people listening who don't know, can you tell us what is your organisation and break down for us what is it you do exactly? So I see you set up shelters and send aid packages out. What are in those packages?
Yeah, well, I represent now Inside public organization, which before the war was an advocacy and also community-based LGBTQI organization. But I also represent the Women's March, which we established 4 years ago as a main advocacy event for women and men equality, for feminism and gender equality, ratification of Istanbul Convention. But now we are completely reoriented, of course, to deliver the humanitarian needs for our communities. So except the shelters where we can host people, we also doing a lot of work with relocation and evacuation people from the conflict, from the bombing cities and also from those territories which are now under occupation. We are trying to bring them to more safe spaces like here in Western Ukraine still, and then also to relocate them to other countries where we have partners who can take care of them. We also, for instance, established a good cooperation, let's be honest, with the Airbnb to somehow help women with children which are fleeing Ukraine. So now they have at least 1 month of free accommodation in the safe place, because honestly, not every house in Europe is a safe place for women with children because of their additional vulnerability during the war. And also we do a huge amount of work of delivering humanitarian aid by the request. So we have forms which people fill, and we are trying to send everywhere where it's possible to send it, of course, by post or just to rent a car and somehow deliver those packages with food, medicines, hygiene things, and other things which people are asking us to deliver.
Thanks, Olena. Also, very good to welcome Valerie Voshchevska, who's joined on the official your organisation's official account. Val, is there anything you'd like to add to that? What should foreign listeners know about what's happening in Ukraine and the work that you guys are doing?
I think we've been saying for quite a while that it's just important for us to know that people are listening to our actual needs, what Ukrainian people need, and that the help that we are given is actually stuff that we have asked for, and Olena just spoke about it briefly as well. So just as long as we sort of, I think, Olena, I don't know if you spoke about it before as well, but there are certain things that are probably a little bit, people send it with goodwill, but sometimes they just clog up, storage facilities and for example, like, summer dresses for women, not very needed right now. Medicine is much more needed, and so on and so forth. So, and Olena, both on her account and on Women's March, we do specifically ask for specific things like donations and whatnot. So just to say that as long as people are listening to us and listening to our needs and supporting us in the ways that we need to, that's all we can ask for at this point.
And in your organisation, who are the volunteers? Are there people that have been working with you from before the war, and have you found new people since?
Well, I can answer on that. I would say that like the whole team is still working from the different parts of the Ukraine, and some of them also are now located in European countries. But what we also did, and what we also see, that like, let's say, the beauty of consolidation of Ukrainian people nowadays, that here in Lviv, for instance, then we call for volunteers who want to help, to support people, to pack, to buy things, to deliver things. We gathered more than 35 people, during one day. So basically, that's mostly those people also who are now internally displaced persons like us, who also suffered, but they came to support others. So I guess that in such circumstances, of course, we can talk a lot about the women's solidarity and self-support, and also, this union around the one thing, like to support others who are now in danger.
You must be hearing an awful lot of awful stories from the people you're helping. Is it difficult for you to sometimes to get through the day? How do you motivate yourself?
The main thing here, I guess, is, for instance, during the first day of the war, I just subscribed to different chats, volunteers chats in different cities, just to see the whole situation. And I'm still there. So each day, that's the thousands of stories of casual people who are sending, they desperate, they are like dying, they can't leave the city, and they all ask for help. And it is awful, honestly, because you just realize that you can't help to everybody. That's the thing, and that's also the general crisis, which is not like it's just very generalized, like in terms of the support and help. So, for instance, for those who are still there in the danger, that's mostly women who can't leave because they are taking care about others, small children, elderly people, people with disabilities. And it seems like it's not like nobody cares, but it seems like in general situation, people just saying like, leave your city, go to more safe places. But nobody thinks that many people have special needs and they can't just leave. That's not possible.
You mentioned earlier on that your shelters for LGBTQI people. How has the war, and this is a question I guess for Olena and for Val, how has the war affected this community in a way that's potentially even more dire than for others?
I would say like that's also like general threats, of course, the threats of the security and safety. But the additional burden is, of course, this fear about the possible occupation of Russia. Because we already heard, and we also went through this history 8 years ago, then the Donbas was occupied and the Crimea as well. We heard so many stories, and we also saw many people from LGBTQI communities who were tortured in this basement, on the Donbas and Crimea. And they also was the victims of the crimes, hate crimes, due to their identities, due to their sexual orientation. So, of course, like the first waves of those who tried to leave the Ukraine, we saw many families, like 2 girls with children, 1, 2, 3 children with their entire families. So that's those who are specifically scared of this possible regime.
Val, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just obviously, this is mostly a question for Olena, but just to say, for those of you who don't know, is one of the leading LGBTI activists and women's rights activists in Ukraine, and has been doing this work for a very long time, and not just starting with the latest iteration of the war, but all the way back to Maidan, and probably before that, 2014, and so on and so forth. So I guess for those who want to know more and help more, Olena's your person to follow.
Absolutely. I believe Francis has a question.
Yes, thank you, David, and thank you both. I'm very interested by what you were saying, Olena, about the use of technology in keeping in touch with various different groups around the country. I'm just wondering if you could speak generally about the use of, I know Telegram has been something apparently that's been used a lot, just about the general experience of how from the start of the war this has been used in a way that brings people together, but perhaps also for sharing accurate information. Just be interested in your perspective on that, because it seems something that's quite new to this that we've not seen before.
Yeah, I'm totally agree with you. Like, I saw the huge impact of this, usage of these platforms for people who are asking for help, who are seeking for help, because before, of course, it was not so widespread. Let's be honest. And mainly it is, let's say, popular now among LGBTQI communities. But then we talk about women, honestly, we still have a problem, because many of those who need support and help, they can't use it, just, don't have skills, don't have any access. So, for instance, we received around 15 requests to our traditional social networks like Facebook, for instance, on the Women's March. Then people just saying, like, I need the psychological support, because we also have this hotline 24/7 in Telegram for women. And they said, like, I don't know how to join, I don't know how to use it. So basically that's what we also see, like, these additional issues with somehow during the war start to educate people how to use it. But that also what I observed during this war, like, it seems to me like we come back like 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, because what I expect that people will be, share all those initiatives in the social network, Facebook, for instance, Instagram, Telegram. But what we still experience that if you need some help from somebody, you need to call. Like, now it's face-to-face communication. That what is working. Basically, I need to call to the transport company. I need to call to some friend who will call to some friend, and then they will deliver something to you. So now we just calling.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that we've seen these developments in the way that you describe, and it brings to mind to me some of the conversations and analysis that occurred after the Arab Spring, and the use of technology there in keeping people united even in times when other platforms went down. I just have one other question to you, Olena, which is just about the general experience of being in Ukraine at the moment. I mean, what's a day-to-day existence like? Are the shops open? Is this a country that is still almost impossible to travel around, or in those areas that were formerly occupied? I mean, just what's the experience like? Is this a country that feels like it's still very much in those places that were once controlled at war, or does it feel like these places have been liberated and are already starting to rebuild? I think that's something that listeners will find very interesting.
That's pretty different in terms of experience. So, for instance, I spent more than 2 weeks in Kiev under very heavy bombing, let's say. It was not just bombing, but also shootings everywhere around my house. And many houses around mine are ruined now in Kiev. So it really depends on the district. I mean, in terms of the huge, big Kiev, of course, capital. But we all saw what happened to the small cities around Kiev. So basically, my experience, it was like during the first 2 or 3 days of the war, it was more or less, let's say, fine, because shops still worked, like pharmacies open, and you can leave your house and go somewhere. But then it completely changed. So there was no access anymore to the food stores or pharmacies. And people just, were so desperate looking for at least something, because even water, it was a huge deficit of the drinking water in the shops, because people just, in panic, they try to buy everything which is possible. And it became worse and worse, each day, including those heavy bombing. So basically, that's why I made a solution to relocate our organization to more safe region, let's say, in the Western Ukraine, and establish here shelters, because at least it is possible to do something for people here. But honestly, then I came here to Lviv. It was a shock for me. During several days, I just can't got the sense how it's possible to go around, for instance, to take coffee or just have a walk around the city without shootings, without people who are trying to search for anything, pharmacies, like food stores and everything like that. So it is a pretty hard, let's say, experience, I guess, that for everybody. Like, then you are changing those regions, or even for those, I can't even imagine, for those who came to other countries, it is so it is hard on the psychological level to adopt.
Katie, you've been listening to this conversation. I'm just wondering if you had any questions for Olena or for Val.
I think what you're saying there about everyday life in Ukraine is incredibly interesting. Obviously, this is kind of the $1 million question, but I wonder, from your perspective, how you see things potentially going, and what your hopes are for the future.
I don't know. I still don't have a time, to understand what will happen, because from the beginning I thought like few days and everything will come back to normal life. But now I understand that it will never happen, because, well, for many people, there will be no normal previous life, because their houses are destroyed. Their lives are destroyed. Many people died. And for instance, even if the war will finish soon, we all hope for that, of course. But I can't even imagine the huge crisis afterwards, because even now we receive the requests from different women from different cities, and they like 2 weeks ago already we started to receive these requests. Like, they are saying, we don't have any jobs, we don't have any access to work, we need money. So can you imagine the amount of such people that will be increasing, each day? So I don't know how it will be possible to support everybody.
Val, I know you have to drop off in a few minutes. Do you want to give us your final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess, with the realization that this might not be over that fast, I think comes also a realization of us having to slightly shift how we think about some of the people who have been affected by war, and sort of, in particular, I'm talking about women. I think there's been so many reports around sexual violence perpetrated by Russian soldiers, and we've seen that over the past couple of days quite intensely. And I think what we have been trying to also encourage people, our audiences that are outside of Ukraine, is to view women not just as sort of, objects in a way of things that happen to them, but also as individuals who are fighting together with everyone. They're not just, sisters, mothers, and grandmothers of brave heroes protecting Ukraine, but they're actually those brave heroes. And I think the work that Olena and the volunteers who are currently in Ukraine have been doing just goes to show as well how important it is for us to remember that a lot of these people are actively and bravely and unstoppably doing a lot of work to protect Ukraine and to support people all across the country. So I would just ask everyone, if it's possible, and if this is something that you're interested in following further, just to follow us, both the account I'm speaking from today, Olena's account, and we're across all the other social media channels for you to look at how you can get involved and how you can help. And just a final thought, if you do see stories of brave Ukrainian women who have been doing some of this amazing work, just try to amplify them and support them, because it's quite important for us to know that we are being heard.
Thank you very much, Val. Just a question for Olena. You mentioned earlier about the sense of solidarity you felt when you were finding new volunteers. Could you speak a little bit more about that? Has the war, in some sense, invigorated the Ukrainian community, and how has that felt? That you put out a call for volunteers, and you said you had more than 30 people.
Yeah, I said more than 30 people per day. So basically, it's much more. So it seems to me like, it unites us, the huge group of those who wants to support others. So, for instance, among those people who came to us to volunteer, I just observed many people who 8 years ago escaped from Donbass. Their houses, their lives were ruined first time. And then now it's the second time. But still they found the forces to come here, like having almost nothing, and to put their forces to support others. That's what I talking about.
We've spoken a lot on this podcast, and there's been so much commentary in the West about President Zelensky's leadership. And I just wanted to hear your perspective on him and what you feel the common feeling around among Ukrainians is towards your leader.
Well, I would say that, yes, I see the consolidation of Ukrainian society around him. And it's first of all because of the war. Because it seems to us that they are taking like good solutions now and supporting others, and then we also, consolidate ourselves to fight together. So I guess that this is pretty casual thing, which is happening during all wars. Then you have a leader who is mostly doing the right thing, so people trying to support. But seriously, I just thinking about the next steps and continuation. It really depends on what will be during the next rounds of negotiations, because now it seems to me like everybody mostly oriented to be a winner in this war. But honestly, nobody knows what does it mean.
Yes, that's a really interesting perspective, and I agree. I think that the what happens in the negotiations and what perhaps Zelensky is willing to concede perhaps will be very relevant to the next phase of everything. I just had one other question relating to sort of Zelensky and the broader political picture. I'm very conscious that obviously you've been working so intensely that it may not be something that you've been as focused on, but what is your just general feeling about how the West, perhaps, or Western Europe has responded, and America, to Ukraine's crisis? Do you think that the West has done enough? Do you feel, like some people have commented that they're being more critical towards certain countries? Just interesting to hear your general perspective on what's happened since the invasion in terms of the international community.
Well, I would say that it's not. It's never black and white, especially then it comes to geopolitical situation. What I observed, that's of course mainly it's still seen as a conflict between West and East. And it seems to me like Ukraine is somewhere, in the center of this fight. So from the beginning, I observed that we are not as like this. We are like an object more in this, confrontation between NATO and Russia, Biden and Putin and everything like that. But now a situation changed, and especially then I see on this geopolitical map, it seems to me like it's quite interesting, because now we see that many countries in Europe just, let's say, somehow changed the power relocation. So basically now we see how Poland or Turkey trying to be, the most visible and the most effective countries in this war, supporting Ukraine. And from the other hand, we also see what happened in Hungary. Then the conservatives, yes, mostly ultra-rights, again won the elections. And now we also observe what is happening in France, and I think that the position of Macron is also pretty dependent on this situation because he wants to somehow also to get electorate, which is now, let's say, more conservative. So basically, that seems to me like my expectation that the Europe will be more conservative in the nearest time, unfortunately. And that is something which we need all to consider in our, efforts to somehow fight for democracy, for humanity, for human rights. So I expect that it will be very hard years after this war in terms of the human rights agenda.
Olena, I wonder if I can ask, the Russian propaganda machine has been in overdrive since the war began. The Russian state media trying to frame what we're seeing in Ukraine as fake news, the likes of the atrocities that we saw in Bucha. We had Putin yesterday saying were faked by the West. I actually personally met someone at the weekend, a man from Poland, who was casting doubt on the Western reports about the atrocities that we're seeing in Ukraine. So I wonder what you would say to news consumers, particularly Russians, who are believing the rhetoric that they are being fed, that what we're seeing in Ukraine is faked, and that the extent of the atrocities that have been perpetrated, those who disbelieve them. I wonder what you would say to those news consumers.
That's hard to say something to those who are still under this trend of Russian propaganda, because what I observe that mostly those people, even if they understand that this is completely, untrue, or that those people are lying to them from the TVs, it's still hard to accept it and to change the position, especially then you're isolated in your own country. So basically it works with this propaganda, it works like that. Then you don't have anything. Like you live almost in ruins without any access to economical, social equality. You need to believe in something. And this is why Putin is so popular. He just gave them the huge nation idea of the great nation. And nothing else, can't change their minds because they believe. And this is something which is also applied to other countries in such crises. And honestly, I don't know how to fight with that. This is a very good question, especially to international institutions and international, let's say, mechanisms, which are, from my point of view, completely a disaster.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. Or sign up to Dispatches, our daily Ukraine newsletter, which brings stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so that you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly with us by emailing podcasts@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear, and on Twitter, Sophie Coe.